This place is where diseases are cured, Nobel Prizes are won, and the technology that's making the world a better place is made. Welcome to the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology. Founded in 1912, 36 years before Israel's independence, it is one of Israel's oldest and most prestigious universities. One of its pioneers, Albert Einstein himself. Three Technion professors have won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Dan Shechtman discovered something thought impossible, a quasi-crystal.
My research is centered on the structure and properties of metallic materials. Over the years, I have been developing different metallic alloys, and in recent years, magnesium alloys. In the future, we use the wonderful alloys that we have developed over the years and 3D print them to form useful structures.
Avram Hershko and Aaron Shechanover discovered the control mechanism of the protein in the cell, which is a huge leap for cancer treatment research.
I hope that in the future we shall see also drugs to combat other diseases like Alzheimer and other neurodegenerative diseases.
Professor Shulamit Levenberg is pioneering stem cell research here at the Technion.
We try to engineer pieces of tissues in the lab, and these pieces of tissue can then be implanted to repair or replace damaged tissues. In the future, we plan to take tissue engineering to its next level. We established the Bioprinting Center, and we can now print biomaterial and cells to build tissue that can be personalized and large-scale tissue, complex tissue.
I am here in Professor Hossam Chayek's laboratory. He has developed nanos, which, upon sampling a patient's breath, can diagnose up to 17 different diseases.
All my life, I have believed in equal opportunity for every life over Earth. And therefore, the next step in our research and development is to enable diagnostic tools that are very cheap, very affordable, that could be delivered to every person.
The Technion is not only a science powerhouse, but it's also an engine for coexistence. Over 20% of the student body are Arabs, the same proportion as there is in the overall Israeli population. Imagine life without fast internet streaming. Well, the Lempel Ziv algorithm developed by Technion professors finds a way to compress data without losses. Now that's important when you're streaming your favorite TV show. For over a century at the Technion, people from all over Israel, all over the world, have joined forces to solve some of humanity's greatest problems. If you care, share.
And welcome to this webinar, where the best technology in Israel meets the top medicine in Brazil. My name is Salomão Yoshpe. I'm the president of the Associação de Amigos do Technion Brasil, also known as the Brazilian Technion Society. The Brazilian Technion Society is one among several Technion societies around the globe, and our mission is to instill support within Brazil's public in general for the Technion Institute of Technology in Israel and its activities. With our activities in Brazil, we hope we can bring Brazilian people, institutions, and even corporations closer to the Technion, and so promote exchange programs and research cooperation projects and enduring relationships among them. We also aim to help undergraduate and postgraduate students who may have an interest in attending one of the most prestigious technology universities of the world achieve this. And in doing so, we at the Brazilian Technion Society will be contributing with Brazil's society by creating productive and long-term relationships between Brazilian institutions and the Technion. As you all know, the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, is consistently ranked among the world's top science and technology universities. It was Israel's first university, founded in 1912, having Albert Einstein as one of its founders, so well before the founding of the state of Israel itself. It's hard to distinguish the history of the state of Israel from the Technion. And if today we recognize Israel as being the startup nation, it owes it in no small amount to the Technion. With 18 academic departments in engineering, the natural sciences, architecture, and medicine, the Technion Institute is the powerhouse of technology and innovation in Israel. Sufficient to say that the Technion graduates founded and lead 2/3 of Israeli companies on the NASDAQ. So at the end of this webinar, I will have the chance of posting information as to how you can contact us and learn more about our activities. In today's webinar, we'll have the chance to witness a dialogue and exchange of views and information about the COVID-19 crisis and the road ahead in medicine, medical education, and technology in medicine. Having the perspective of two leaders of two prestigious institutions, one in Israel and one in Brazil. For this, we invited two very distinguished guests. From the Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology, will be talking with Professor Alon Wolf. Professor Wolf is Technion's Vice President for External Relations and Resource Development at the Technion. Professor Wolf is a mechanical engineer and obtained his PhD from the Technion in 2002. Besides being a professor at the Technion, Professor Wolf is a visiting professor and researcher at the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Recipient of several awards, Professor Alon Wolf is best known for having founded and directed the Biorobotics and Biomechanics Lab inside the Technion, known among other things for creating the bionic hand or robotic snakes for urban rescue missions. As a co-founder of Med Robotics, Professor Wolf helped invent a medical snake for minimally invasive procedures on organs that are hard to reach. Professor Wolf, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Bom dia, I think it's still in Brazil. Thank you for inviting me to join this webinar and share with you the wonderful things that we do here at the Technion in Haifa.
Thank you, Alon. From Einstein Hospital and Medical School in São Paulo, Brazil, we will be talking with Dr. Sidney Klausner. Dr. Sidney Klausner is a gastroenterology surgeon. He graduated from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of São Paulo, did his residency in surgery of the digestive system and coloproctology at the Hospital das Clínicas here in São Paulo. And in his fourth year of residency, Dr. Klausner was chosen to intern at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, United States. He's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. Having authored important publications, Dr. Sidney Klausner is currently president of the Albert Einstein Hospital. So welcome, Dr. Klausner.
Thank you, Solomon, and all panelists. And it's an opportunity and my privilege to be with you in this morning, this webinar. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, and for those who may not know, we also have people joining us from other countries. In its latest publication, Newsweek magazine has ranked Albert Einstein Hospital of São Paulo as the best hospital in Latin America and among the 40 best hospitals in the world. Given its punctuation at the survey, had Einstein Hospital been a US hospital, it would have ranked among the US 10 best hospitals. I am glad to announce that in the few coming weeks, we'll have our first research cooperation agreement being signed by the Technion and Einstein Hospital. Also, please allow me, before we start, to say a big thank you to our Brazilian Technion Society members who are following us today, and also a warm hello to the members of the Technion societies around the world who are also interested in learning more about Brazil. And so thank you all for attending. Please know that this webinar is being recorded, so you'll have access to it on our Facebook page. We'll tell you how at the end of this webinar. Also, please feel free to ask questions utilizing the chat function of on your Zoom screen at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to select some questions and pose them to our two guests as we go along. We'll now start this dialogue by proposing a first theme, and I will start with asking Dr. Sidney Klausner, and then ask Alon also to comment on this. Many who are watching this webinar are curious about similarities and the differences as to how Israel and Brazil responded to the COVID-19 challenge. We know that Einstein Hospital was the first hospital in Brazil to treat a COVID-19 patient, and is involved in research and public initiatives as well to facing this challenge. And we also know that the Technion as well is at the center of Israeli response to the COVID-19. I would like to ask each one of you to describe from your personal points of view, how has your respective countries dealt so far with the challenge of COVID-19? What policies and strategies were employed? What have we learned so far that we didn't know? And if we would have employed different strategies had we known then what we now know? And more importantly, what do you think the next months ahead will bring to us regarding public policy, treatment, vaccines, and other aspects of this secular crisis? So I'll start with you, Sidney, please.
Okay, thank you, Solomon. It's a pleasure for me. And again, Albert Einstein Society was founded in 1955 with the mission and the values to be grateful to the Brazilian society as they received the immigration of the Jewish community here in São Paulo, Brazil. And we choose as a hospital based upon values like mitzvah, refuah, chinuch, vetzedakah. When we talk about social justice, that means in our value tzedakah, the mission to be grateful of this reception by the Brazilian society was in mean to retribute in terms of healthcare. So Albert Einstein now, and this is introduction just to say that we are a private hospital, a philanthropic hospital with a not-for-profit institution, but in our mission, everything we do in the private sector, we try to reach the public sector also. So in Brazil, we have a healthcare system that is formed by two sectors. The public one that is in charge of 78% of the population, and the private sector. And we have a private hospital and some satellite units, but also we reach more than 1,200,000 people from the public sector. And this was before the pandemics. So we prepare ourselves as the private sector for the pandemic since the beginning of January. So we develop in our molecular biology lab how to make the diagnosis, so that we made the first diagnosis of COVID-19 in Brazil. And we were the first lab that was allowed to do by ourselves, not needing the second proof by the government. And as we prepare, we achieved a lot of equipment like ventilators. We developed some startup how to transform our beds in ICU beds also. So we are over prepared for the pandemics in the private sector. And as we had our intelligence cells to think about projections, how the pandemics will affect all the country, in terms of big data, we tried to make these projections and how the private sector will be impacted. So we had in the beginning the possibility to transform even 300 beds of apartments, not ICU, in ICU beds. And as the private sector didn't have this amount of patients, so we reached maximum 180 people in admissions. So as the curve was a little bit flattened in our private sector, we deliver all the excess of the equipment, even the human resources, to the public sector. So now what we are having in Brazil is a kind of stability in the private sector. So we have more than 3 weeks that there is no growing of the number of patients in the private sector, but in the public sector, due to the policies that we have in Brazil, also in the federal government, also in the state and the city, we are looking some growing and very, very worried about this curve that is every day we have been in front of numbers of mortality in the public sector, and we invested how to implement more ICU beds in 2 public hospitals that Albert Einstein already for 10 years has had in our environment, the Hospital Moisés Deutsch, in a very, very far neighborhood in São Paulo, and also our public hospital for transplantations and oncology. We made the capacity of these 2 hospitals more a campaign hospital in the Pacaembu Stadium in region of Pacaembu. We had more than 1/3 of the ICU capacity of the city hall, of the mayor. So we are very, very in charge of the health of the public sector, also trying not to overload the capacity of ICU and severe cases. In Brazil, we had not the same leadership that we saw in other countries. We had here one kind of speech in the state of São Paulo government, also in the city of São Paulo, different from the federal government that in the beginning and remained some thinking like that, try to put the population to work, not to be isolated. So Albert Einstein, in following the recommendations of other countries, even the OMS and the CDC, we in São Paulo, we had the rule of isolation and social distancing as the way that we could lead to a flattening curve in private sector, and we are trying to reach this flattened curve also in the public sector. That we have some difficulties in the public sector because we have a lot of communities that people live together in the same room, for example, almost 10 people. So it's very difficult to isolate these people to impair the transmission of the coronavirus. So the situation in Brazil, we have the states of the north and northeast of the country very, very in a bad situation because of lack of prepared for the corona crisis and pandemics. We have a lack of ICU beds, lack of specialties, for example, like Amazonas, like Pará. So the mortality reached very high numbers very fast. And we are trying to help also through telemedicine that we can discuss after in our webinar. And we also talk with people from other countries, even with Israel also, how we can take more ideas or more initiatives to deal with this crisis in Brazil. So I think we can talk about the specific other issues along with this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sidney. That was very good, and I would like now to pass the word to Alon. If you could speak a little bit to what's going on your end, Alon, that would be great.
Yeah, well, thank you. There's a lot of similarity, actually. You know, I listened to Sidney, and one thing we realized, I think, very early stage, and we all know that, is that we know more. There is more that we don't know about this virus than we know, and I think that in many cases, and I reflected what you said at the end, Sidney, is that we learn a lot from communities and our colleagues that already experienced. So for Israel, for example, I know Israel has a very strong connections also with Italy. So we learn a lot from the experience of the Italian doctors and universities, how they deal with this crisis, because as you know, unfortunately, Italy was affected very badly from this virus. Now, from I think the country point of view, Israel, I'll start from the country. Israel was actually responding very early to the appearance of the coronavirus, and I think already at the early diagnostic of patients in Israel, the governments decided to start blocking the main gateway to the gate to the country, which is the Ben Gurion Airport, and trying to control the flights and the people coming in. And when they started to realize that infection is within the population, then we also moved into, of course, social distances and a complete lockdown. I think that this Passover, this Leil Seder, was one of the strangest. We asked Ma nishtana, well, what is different from this night from other nights? This is you read it in the Haggadah, and this Leil Seder was really different because we were all isolated from our family. I had the Leil Seder with my father on a Zoom, my 78-year-old father and my in-laws in a Zoom call on a computer screen, and we sang the songs. We read the Haggadah. It was really strange, sad, but at the end, I remember my father telling me this was one of the most special Leil Seder he ever experienced. He was so excited because for him, he was ready to be left alone at his home, and this is a big issue we had to deal. All people that were quarantined and left home without being able to be in contact, physical contact with their children because of the being afraid or the fear to get them infected. And also here in Israel, the challenge was to keep the curve, to stretch the timeline. It's not flattened, the curve. It's, if you take a curve which is sharp and you just stretch the timeline, then it becomes flattened. And I think the goal was to try and stretch the time and get as low number of infected people at a given time, so the health system could deal with it. So maybe the accumulation would be a large number, but they're going to be distributed in a timeline where the medical facilities in the country would not collapse, as happened in other countries that we experienced. Right now, as you may have heard, in the last 2 weeks, Israel is stepping out of the lockdown slowly. But unfortunately, in the last few days, you see an increase of infection, especially in schools where children are probably in close contact. And we will have to, again, this is like many things in medicine, dealing with this virus is all about statistics. Is what other experience and try to reflect it on what you do. So it's like statistical risk management. So I think it's on a daily basis. As for the Technion, we had to move very fast to a distance learning, like many universities around the world. So the campus is completely open. It was open, but completely empty, no students at all. We had to move in like 4 days into distance learning, where Zoom is used heavily, and students learn from home. This is not simple. This is not, for those of you experienced teaching with Zoom, it's completely different than actually being face to face to a student in a classroom. And we're still dealing with this, and now with the exam, how to deal with the exam. As for research, again, research was stopped because you were not allowed to go into campuses and from the fear of infection again. However, we had about 50 plus labs that were identified as Corona labs that deal with things related to Corona, that were allowed to work and continue do the research and develop tools for the health system to assist the medical doctors to deal with the disease. So we had, I would say, 3 vectors of research. One is in the protection of medical staff. And one of the things we learned quite fast from others' experience is the risk of infection of the medical staff, mostly from the aerosols, those salvia, hail that when we breathe in and breathe out, this is how we spread the virus. So protecting of the medical staff. And there are several technology that I can talk later that came out of this this collaboration with the local hospitals headed by Rambam Medical School, the medical school associated with the medical center associated with the medical school of the Technion. Several labs dealt with treatments, different treatments, and therapeutic and how to deliver therapy into the lung. Liquid foam therapy, for example, from Josue Schnitzman, which is, it's out there almost. And of course, diagnostic, as Sydney also mentioned, different diagnostic methods to try and speed up the process. This actually was a very unique experience where researchers had to take knowledge that they gain in basic research, years, like 10, 20 years of research, and then in no time try to implement it into something which is usable by the health system, by the doctors, by the system itself, robotics, AI, big data, and all those things that Cindy mentioned, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. So this is the contribution of the Technion. Many of these technologies, a lot of these technologies are already being used, hoping also not to get to the second wave that, no one knows if it's going to come or not, but our working assumption is that it is going to hit us sometime. So we're continuing to develop these technologies. The country also dedicated a lot of money for research and development of practical system to be applied. So everything was speed up, like what Israel does very good. If in time of crisis, we respond very fast and know how to improvise. That is in a few minutes to describe what was happening here in Israel.
Very good, Alon. Thank you so much. We have one of the people watching the webinar, José Xavier. He had a question, and I think it applies to both of you. If you could quickly comment, he's asking about the regulations and the requirements for approval. In Brazil, it's called Anvisa. In Israel, there must be an authority that does that. If you could just quickly comment on how the innovation that was brought upon during the crisis, how has this been dealt with the regulation authorities going through the approval process of a protocol or a treatment during the COVID? And I'll start with you, Sydney, if you could just.
Yes, I try to be very, very short. Here in Brazil, Anvisa had a very tough process to regulation in terms of new devices, also in pharma, in drugs. And as we are living in a war moment, like this crisis is like a war, and they open everything that is related to the combat of the COVID-19, had a very, very fast process, even not obligated to be part of this process in the Anvisa. So it's a very good situation to improve new devices and to startups to put their ideas in work, because we have now a temporary rule that everything related to COVID have a fast track through Anvisa, even not necessary Anvisa, this kind of regulation.
The same, by the way, applies here in Israel. You know, we have the fast track. As for technologies like AI, robotics, you know, that are used in medical facilities, or protecting vests, these have a very fast track now to being tested. As for medication, I think at least several cases that I know here, there was a faster track to move from small animal to big animal trials. And I think when you move to human trials, this is where it's, you know, going to stick to the regulation again, because, you know, it's humans. Although there's always, of course, the cases of what we call courtesy, you know, even if, and maybe Sidney, you can refer to this, you know, even if this medication was not approved, it's still considered as a courtesy because the situation of this patient is critical, and this is, you know, like, you know, if it's going to help, you know, good. If not, then so yeah, we had the same process here also.
Yeah, so I think a lot of similarities, I could say, among both countries, definitely. Let me pass the word to my colleague Salo Rapoport here, so he can introduce the next theme.
Yeah, thank you, Salomon. And also from my side, very warm welcome to everybody, and also to Sidney and to Alon. I think it's a great privilege to all of us. And my question will go back a little bit about how each one of the institutions, Einstein and Technion, have adapted to what have been changing in terms of digitalization, remote work, and education. I think Alon has already mentioned something about it, and then I will go to Sidney to start this, and also about what are the trends that you believe that were already in place, or they will be accelerated in terms of the education, the medicine, medical care, treating patients, such as telemedicine. We know it has been something important in this moment, artificial intelligence. So the idea here is to talk a little bit, if you could explain a little bit about how each one of the institutions have adapted, and what are the trends that comes along with the COVID, that is maybe will be shaping the future for both Einstein and Technion. So I think Cindy could start, and then we'll go over to Alon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Salo, for the question. Here in Einstein, we had, I will start from the end about telemedicine, because here in Einstein, we started our telemedicine program since 2012. And here in Brazil, we don't have a modern regulation in terms of telemedicine. So we are every time doing some transgression of rules, waiting for the impact in our councils of medicine here in Brazil. But the legislation that related to telemedicine in Brazil is from 2002. So 18 years ago, that regulation that in a era you didn't have any band or smartphone. So they needed in that regulation to be a physician in the 2 points of the conversation that miss every improvement that you have in the telemedicine. So in these pandemics, they also was liberated to do the telemedicine in our country related to COVID. And then we have 2 very huge programs here. One in teleassistance in ICU, very far away from here in North State and Northeast, where there is no specialty, there is no specialist in terms of ICU and severe case, just the generalist on call in that ICU. So our specialists, pneumologists, cardiologists, neurologists can reach the generalist in that ICU and discuss the case and take the best initiative for that patient. So it's a very huge, we have more than 500 beds of ICU in telemedicine. Also 120 cities in north state of Pará that we reach in telemedicine to primary care. So we are using this for COVID-19 also. But in an ecosystem that we've developed 5 years ago when we implementing the digital transformation of Einstein, and we created a couple of products here, like the beds predictions that we can predict in terms of AI, how we are going to use or how the patient, the probability to be in admission or not in the first care, in the emergency care. So we are taking advantage of this through big data, epidemiologic studies, and we think that it is a very big opportunity to deliver the healthcare also through telemedicine. So we make available to every physician that work with us the telemedicine platform to reach their patients that are afraid to be in the hospital or in the office, in the consultation. It's another kind, I think, of healthcare that we are going to deliver in the future, apply to artificial intelligence also, how we are using some startup developing how to deal with the primary care attention, how we can deal with patients with comorbidities like chronic disease, because the COVID-19 is killing the more, the higher age, also people that don't have that control in terms of chronic disease. So it's very important to engage patients, and I think the digital transformation has all to do with that, how to make patients very close to their doctor and how to control chronic disease also. It's just part of the future that I'm seeing in the very short phase.
I'll continue, and I will not repeat on the things that Sydney mentioned, because I think it's really identical what we experience here with AI and big data and sensors that now deployed. And but I think that one of the main things that happened during COVID-19 is bridging a psychological barrier. Sydney can refer to the medical staff. I will refer also to the teaching staff, the professors. I've been working in the medical facility, medical research for more than 20, close to 25 years now, with robotics, with several robots and treatments. And whenever we engineers, scientists develop technologies, whether it's sensors, robots, treatments, whatever, we have to consider the user. And the user in this case are the physician. And there is a psychological barrier that need to be crossed. In how much would a doctor or a surgeon let a robot take over him during surgery? From a scientific point of view, my robot can do everything, but will the doctor allow the robot to do everything? So these are psychological barriers that need to be crossed. And I think that what happened in the medical field due to the corona and the need to speed up everything, and I think we both referred about this previously in the previous question, is that this psychological barrier was lowered dramatically. You know, physicians, doctors are more willing and ready to accept technology and implement it because they realize that this technology also helps them, not just the patients. For example, all the technologies that are being developed to protect the doctor from being infected, all kind of stickers, nanotechnology, sensors, robots. Suddenly, everyone is willing to use it, to use this technology because no one wants to get infected. When I developed my first system for spine surgery, the robot for spine surgery to insert screws, one of the main reasons to convince doctor to use it, beside the fact that it's much more safe for the patient, is that doctors during orthopedics or orthopedic surgery or spine surgery, when they put screws in the spine, they use a lot of X-ray to see where they are. And they are exposed to X-ray, therefore they're exposed or have a higher risk to get cancer, throat cancer. When they see that, during surgery, they need to do only one X-ray, suddenly they want to adopt the technology because the technology also helps them. Now, from the professor's point of view now, we've been having a debate at the Technion about moving into distance learning for several years now, simply because, continuous education, lifetime education now is a buzzword, also in medical field and in engineering field and everything. You don't stop learning. Everything is changing so fast around us, technology. So even if you graduated the university and you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you have to continue to educate yourself. And the education is usually done by distance learning, webinars, courses, MOOCs, all these. And it was very hard for professors in the university to switch and to accept that they will have to go through a process where they're going to be a picture or a video or something on a screen without students. And as I said before, in 4 days, we had to close the campus and move from 0%, or not zero, I would say 10%, because we had some videos recording, but no live, by the way. We had to move to 100%. This was a psychological barrier that was crossed in no time. And now professors start saying, it's not that bad. Maybe we should consider this. And probably we're talking now about 20 to 25, maybe 30% of our curriculum was going to be taught online to prepare our students for the future of lifetime education. Now, I want to point out one more thing, not just related to medicine and universities, but for industry completely in general. And we mentioned here digital transformation. It's a revolution. We all, it's not a one-dimensional revolution. It impacts every aspect of our life. And industry, and by the way, in Germany, they call it Industry 4.0. I don't know if this phrase is known also in Brazil, but in Europe, it's commonly used. It's a huge, I would say, transformation of the industry. Everything becomes digital, blockchain, smart manufacturing, robots, sensors, big data, all those buzzwords. This revolution is so dramatic, not because of the technology, it's because so many technologies matured in a specific time or point in time. Sensors, big data, computing, cloud robotics, cloud storage of information. Now, what this crisis, and because of the lockdown of almost two and a half months in Israel, emphasized is that these industries, I teach courses in digital transformation in Europe and several universities. And always, you read the journals, the professional journals, and everyone predicts that, those who are not going to switch into the digital or be compatible with the digital revolution are not going to last, are not going to survive. prediction is that 60 to 70% of businesses are going to go bankrupt, because if they don't switch fast to this new, if they not respond. By the way, hospital is an industry. It's industry that deals with people's life, but it's an industry. What was clear now in Israel, and unfortunately, is that these businesses that stayed not, I would say, Industry 4.0 compatible or ready, did not survive. They had to shut down their businesses very fast and went out of business. So it's an entire industry that was just vanished. So it also accelerated the response. So if we, before that, we might have, stretched time a little bit more, 2 or 3 years until you do the transformation. Most of those who didn't do the transformation were not able to continue. Manufacturing, China, everyone was depending on Far East materials, digital things. You cannot manufacture things. You need to send things over the internet. You have to be digital, sensors. So it's a huge effect, and I think psychological barriers and time constant became very, very small. We don't have time now to respond. It was a very important lesson to everyone.
Oh, great. Thank you both. I think it's coming some very amazing time in Upfront. I would like to pass over to Avi Gelberg, who is also a Brazilian Technion Society member, and he would like to address both of you a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Salo. Thank you, everybody. Both the Technion and Einstein are very well known on their research innovation DNA. The Technion, of course, with its unique combination of excellency in engineering, life science, and medicine. And where, as Solomon already mentioned, 2/3 of the Israeli companies in NASDAQ were founded by Technion graduated. And Einstein is dedicated research department and whose startup accelerator at Eretz that work these days also on the COVID-19 tests. Afterwards, if Sidney can mention it, is widely recognized success on his work in Brazil and all over the world. Please talk about a little bit the research and innovation in your specific institutions, and from the employing of new technologies for this case of the COVID, and in general in preparing the new generation of engineering, biomedical engineering and doctors. Please comment the technology part of both institutes, please.
Start, Avi. Thank you, Avi, for the question. And I must tell here that about what Alon said, that in the beginning of the pandemics, there was a team of Einstein, of the teaching Institute of Einstein, going to Israel, and we suspended the visit because there was a risk to be catched in Israel and they cannot go back to Brazil.
And actually, it was a very smart move, because I think the day after everything was locked down.
Yes, and what he said is about, I don't think that we must go to Israel anymore, because we can do it by Zoom or by virtual conversation. In our agreement, we are talking very, very, very deep about making together some initiatives in terms of teaching together, Technion and Einstein. So it's a very good opportunity to be talking about that, because what Avi said in terms of innovation in our environment We are very, very late compared to Israel. So in just after our visits to Israel, that we imagine how to split our research institute in research and innovation. Is occurred like 6-7 years ago, and we create our innovation lab that we achieved with this ecosystem, as I said, was the first healthcare incubator in the country, the Eretz View. It doesn't have this name just for nothing. It's because we start everything using Israel as a benchmark. And what we have today is 34 startups that are incubated in our incubator, the Eretz View incubator. And with this possibility of COVID-19, we saw more than these startups working together in terms of achieve something, for example, like two of our startups, one specializing in intelligential in AI, and the other in facial recognition. They construct together a device that can, through population, measure which of the people have the high temperature, how to measure temperature in terms of intelligential, artificial intelligence, and also in facial recognition, because one startup had a device to control wheelchairs with the lips. So it's a very, very sophisticated facial recognition using together with how to measure temperature. So we are using in these pandemics. Also, we had the opportunity last week to announce another kind of test of COVID based on NGS, Next Generation Sequencing. It's a platform that was created here by one of the startups that we launched 5 years ago and belongs to Einstein, the VARStation platform, that through DNA sequencing, they could sequence the RNA-19, performing a very, very large scale test. Each round of the machine can have 1,500 tests with a very low cost. So I think when all the countries are dealing with some difficulties to the compounds of how to do the PCR, because all of them want to do massive tests with PCR, it's a very, very good way to do massive tests with another technology that was launched here in Einstein, because we had a startup related to DNA sequencing. So this is the ecosystem that we try to use Israel as a benchmark. Also in Technion, I was in Technion visiting last year, just in the genetics labs, for example, and it's very, very the first gold standard platforms in terms of innovation that Einstein tried to follow. But we already, in terms of Brazil, we had a leadership in terms of startups, in terms of using these startups to the COVID-19 pandemics also.
So thank you, and I also want to emphasize that we were looking very much already to meet and to start physically, by the way, not virtually, the collaboration, and we will do that. We will do that in let's be optimistic. With your permission, I would like to share a few slides, because I'd like, one picture is probably better than 1,000 words. And I'll try to share my screen here and show you what we did here also in the Technion. And remember, as I said, I don't know, you see my screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, good. So remember, one of the, Technion, I didn't mention it, but let me emphasize, it's not a regular university. It's more like it's a it's a twin of MIT. It's a technical, you know, it started as a Hochschule, or all about science and engineering. We don't have social sciences. So taking the strength of engineering and medicine and life sciences, we try to combine and come up with solutions. So this is, by the way, the gate to the Technion. This was the big sign above the Technion, keep calm, stay home. We are working on it, COVID-19. This was during the lockdown. Everything was empty, but inside the labs, there were like the lights were on 24/7, people working on developing medications, treatments to deal with COVID-19. We had many meetings with the Rambam Medical Center staff and directors. And one of the things, as I said, we identified is to try to protect the healthcare people from the aerosols. So we took several technologies and research that was already ongoing for many years at the university and converted very fast into equipment or devices that can assist the doctors. I'll show you here a few examples. This is Professor Zussman, world experts in nanofibers. He's developing nanofibers that can be coated almost with everything. A lot of use in the textile industry, also in the defense industry. By the way, if you used to travel in the USA and they take this kind of fabric and rub on your suitcase to see if there is a leftover of gunpowder. The fabric is developed by, most of the fabric is by Professor Zussman. So what he did is he used the same technology to, one of the things we noticed very fast is that, like in many places around the world, doctors were missing masks, protecting masks that can protect them from the aerosols because there were not enough. So he developed this sticker that you attach. It's made of nanofibers coated with some materials that destroy the virus. If you attach it to a surgeon mask, a simple surgeon mask, it makes the mask 100% protected against the COVID-19, being deployed, used in hospitals in Israel and now worldwide. There are millions of orders of those stickers around the world, in Europe, in America, and trying to, now it's actually being manufactured by companies here in Israel and sent worldwide. By the way, I have also here a sample of this. You don't see it here. I'll show it a little bit later, of the sticker. It comes in a pack of 3. This is, by the way, in the hospitals, how the doctors are using it. They're taking conventional surgical mask, and Sydney knows what the surgical mask is. It's not COVID-19, it's not virus protected. And it converted immediately to something which is protecting the doctor. Professor Ezri Tarazi developed this suit that has a unique crown that blows air on this visor that the doctor is wearing. So there's a constant airflow, like an air curtain, that prevents aerosols to go inside and again infect the doctors. He's using a air compressor, and the filter that he's using there are leftovers from the Gulf War we had here. In Israel, they used to give to everyone filters against biological threats because we were afraid that we will have missiles coming here with biological and chemical weapons. So taking those and converting them to something that can be used in hospitals, but again, used in Israel now in many centers and also worldwide. By the way, this is Ezri in the midnight bringing those masks and equipment to Rambam Medical Center. This is the entrance to the healthcare or emergency room, the children emergency room in Rambam Medical Center. As for medications or drug delivery, this is from Josue Schnitzman. So most of medications that are to be inhaled is using inhalator. And the problem is that the aerosols that you inhale, they don't cover completely the lungs. They don't get to the small places or the small part of the lung, and therefore it's very hard to treat and deliver drug there. And what Josue came up with an idea is to use liquid foam therapy. And you can see here on the left a sample of a lung, and you see water running in the tubes, and they see that they're only coming out of certain exits or holes. not everyone is, not all, the water doesn't get to all the exits of this tube, and they just follow gravitation. But if you use liquid foam, like on the right, you see suddenly that the foam comes out of everywhere, which means that if the foam now is carrying medication, it can reach almost every part of the lung. And now he's one of those research that were accelerated and now is being tested on large animals. And you can see a porcine lung on the left, dye that was sent by regular means. You see that the lung is still red. And on the right-hand side, using the liquid foam therapy, or the liquid foam, and you see that the lung is completely colored in blue because the color reached everywhere. Professor Avi Schroeder took his many years of research on treating shrimps. By the way, interesting, Avi's religion, Ultra, is an Orthodox, and he's not, of course, not eating shrimps, it's not kosher, but he's doing research on that because 30% of the population of shrimps are dying every year because of a viral RNA disease, a very strange viral RNA disease. And for those of you who know, the corona is an RNA disease. So we use the same method applied there with food additive to treat patients. Diagnostic. You mentioned before the identification of people that carry the disease with special technology of radar and thermal imaging to see the temperature, and AI. Roy Kishoni used special technique to speed up the test. So instead of taking one sample each and testing one sample at a time, he now take a batch of 64. And if there is only a single batch or a single test that is infected, he can now identify which one of them is infected. By the way, this is being used again in hospitals. Moshe Shoam, Kira Radinsky, again, a graduate of Technion, using AI, a lot of AI to try to identify those parts of the population that is of high risk of infection. One thing I was actually, my suggestion is to use dogs, because I know from my previous research that dogs are able to distinguish, for example, cancer by smelling. Why not using dogs to try to identify patients that carry, because when you exhale and inhale and exhale, you probably exhale the virus, and there is a specific smell for the virus. And can dog detect it? And it's being used now, or dogs are being trained in Israel, and I hear also in the UK now, to try to detect this. But something interesting is the artificial nose by Professor Hussam Hayek, world-known scientist in nanotechnology and nanosensors, because Hussam has developed this sniffer. It's a device where you blow air inside and can tell you whether you carry cancer. You have cancer, and he can diagnose several types of cancer. And in no time, he converted this technology into detecting COVID-19 again. Robotics, and this is again, I'll finish with this. We were approached by the doctors trying, can you develop for us robots that would move inside the corona departments so doctors would not have to be close to the patients? And in no time, these robots were designed, built, and deployed in the corona departments, bringing food, water, and medication, and even taking tests from the patients. Of course, our students volunteered in many places in the country. So this is, in a nutshell, what we did here at the Technion, trying to develop technologies. Many of these technologies turned into companies, but I don't think that the goal was a company at the beginning. And like Sydney, the goal was, like you said, is to try to help first. And a side effect was, some of these technologies matured into becoming something that you can actually incubate and then spin off as a company. And this is just 4 or 5 of the 50 or 60 plus labs that are active 24/7 developing technologies to treat corona.
Wow, a lot of things are happening in Sydney and Alon. I think that it's more than time to start the work between the two institutes and to bring some of the good things that the Technion now is doing to Brazil. It's a lot of things. I think I heard also about some developing of something to cure the COVID-19. And we can thank you about this work. So I will pass back to Solomon, the leading on the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fascinating to listen to both you, Sydney, and Alon. Exciting things that are going on at the Technion and also at Einstein. It makes us really proud also here in Brazil. And I have a question here. One of the people watching this webinar is David Fleshler. He's from the Case Western Reserve University. I know Case has a strong cooperation agreements with Einstein, and he was asking if you both could talk about how institutions such as the Technion and Einstein cooperate with other institutions around the world, and if within this cooperation there is also initiatives pertaining to the COVID-19 challenge. And he's also asking if political aspects interfere with such cooperation. And lastly, because we're getting to the end of this webinar, we have several watchers here who are asking about a cure, vaccines, if there's anything that you're working on or that you're involved that where you could comment a little bit about that. Thank you.
Sydney, go ahead. Maybe you could start.
So we have cooperations with other institutions. Case Western is an institution that we have a cooperation between our graduation schools and also research. I have the opportunity to be 2 years ago in the launching of this partnership, for example. In Latin America, we created the Latin American Alliance in terms of quality and safety, and we are almost every week in touch how to other countries like Argentina, Uruguay, and Colombia, Chile are dealing with these pandemics and trying to put information together. Also, United States and also in Israel with some partnership that we have and conversations. We have a trauma relations in emergency care with Sheba. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we had the opportunity to talk with the emergency care down there, also in terms of testings. So we are trying to take every advantage of these cooperations, but mostly what we have done until now is in terms of information and using as benchmark. And again, we were trying to put this relation with Technion just in March. And today, Alon, I heard that the teams are having a virtual meeting in Technion in Einstein this afternoon, and will be night for you, but yes, they are talking right now. And I think there are a lot of opportunity of benchmarking, even learning in terms of global medicine. For example, what's happening in the public sector in Brazil, such a big country with a lot of singularity of each regions. So this is a very good opportunity to indeed, I think it's one of the things that are going to remain after this pandemic, this world pandemics, is the capacity to cooperate one institution with another institution. There is also a paper just today telling the importance about the cooperation between institutions to win this war.
Yeah, so Technion also has a very large, we have two campuses, by the way. We have the university in New York, in Roosevelt Island, the Technion Cornell Institute of Technology, of course, in Guangdong in China. One of the main concerns in Israel, in academia, is, we're a very small country, 9 million people, is inbreeding. we're very concerned that, everyone comes from the same system and everything thinks the same. So, in places where everyone thinks the same, no one thinks. So we have a strong collaborations from, with universities outside of Israel and, through either direct contract or not, MOUs related to student exchange, research exchange, as we were about to do both of them, and teaching also. Worldwide, not just in Europe. Of course, Europe is a strong target because Israel is part of the EU Research Authority. Technion is a member of the Eurotech. Eurotech is a group of the 7 elite universities of Europe in technology that, one of them is, of course, TU Munich, of course, and these big names. So Technion is part of it. So we have a strong collaboration and we are eager to expand to those elite places, elite hospitals, elite universities where we can actually learn also from other people's experience and different approaches. And as I said, the most risky thing is to inbreathe yourself. You don't expose yourself. We're surrounded by countries that we don't, we cannot move much out of the country. So we are looking for those vectors in Europe, in Asia, in South America, and of course in North America. Very strong collaborations. Yes.
This is great. This is great. Thank you, Alon. Well, we're getting here to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank you so much, Alon and Sydney, for the time that you have dedicated. There are people that are asking Alon if you could make available the slides that you presented. So
I will send you a PDF of the slides. Yes.
That's great. And there are some more other questions that we didn't have the opportunity to ask. We'll forward them along to you, and we'll give those responses back to the people who asked.
Let me just, your permission, just say that, everyone is welcome to just Google Technion and go into our website, and you'll see on the front page all the research, a link to all the research that, I reviewed only a bunch, but, you'll be able to see a lot, and movies, there's YouTube movies where you could see everything. So I'll share the presentation, but I encourage people, if they're interested, to log in or to browse into our webpage, Technion ACIL.
The same way that Alon said, there is a blog that Einstein put on in the internet also called vidasaudavel.einstein.br. Vida Saudável is a healthy life, Alon, the name Vida Saudável, that all the information that the population must have about the COVID and it's updated every day is inside that blog, vidasaudavel.einstein.br.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll have a slide here with the information on how people who watch this webinar can reach us at the Brazilian Technion Society. I would like again to thank everyone. It was a great time and having this dialogue. And I'll leave everyone with a short video showing your lab, Alon, the robotics lab at the Technion.
That's a surprise.
Where we're gonna see the bionic hand, which is something just amazing watching. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Obrigada. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
These days, at least in Israel, children don't get a prosthetic from the government. Even adults can't afford a bionic hand. They can only get only aesthetic hands that don't have any functionality. There are some daily activities that this hand really helps with. They can hold two things simultaneously, they can catch a ball, and they can do other things that weren't able to do before. The process starts when we meet the child in Haifa 3D. We tailor-made each of the hands to the child, and we also gave them the ability to customize the design however they want.
Today's options are mostly a hook hand, a body-powered hand, and a robotic hand. So the robotic hands can cost thousands of dollars. The hook prosthetic gives only one option to close or to open, and here we try to give more options specifically suitable for kids with their superhero on the hands or with their colors.
We're working on further developing these devices, these prosthetic hands. We're trying to make an entirely digital design process from the minute we meet the child until the hand is ready. Most of the hands were given to children in Israel. We also made hands for a child from the Gaza Strip and from the West Bank. We've given hands to a child in Syria and sent designs that were designed here in the Technion to Brazil, US, and the UK. So this project is very multidisciplinary. It ranges from physicians to biomedical engineers to electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. And basically, the Technion provides a great hub for this collaboration to create this multidisciplinary project, and also a great place for creating these innovative research projects like these 3D printed prosthetic hands.
I came here to Technion because I heard they're doing a great research here. I want to specify my research in medical robotics, and I heard about a prosthetic hand project here. And that's why I choose this project where I am implementing haptic feedback to this 3D printed prosthesis.
Hopefully one day the prosthetics industry will move forward and hands will be affordable for anyone. But for now, we just give the hands for free.
The main impact of the hands that we give to children are psychological. So from being the last kid in the class, shy not to be seen, these kids become the superheroes of their class. They have a bionic hands, they have Superman, Iron Man, Spider-Man hands. They have like the coolest new thing in the class, and from always like walk like this, don't want to show their hand. They always look with the hands in front. They're very proud with what they have, and they become special.
This is a very important project from the aspect of the social impact that it gives. So we want to educate our students, our graduates, our community, Technion community, to become more involved in outside also of campus. And this is one of those outreach activities that have a large impact of society and educate our students to become leaders, not just technological leaders, entrepreneurial leaders, but also leaders in impact, ROI, return on impact, the impact that they bring to society and with the technology. And I think this is the strength of the Technion.